Hello everyone, I'm Tex, a Japanese marathon coach. Today's topic is the biggest difference between runners who improve and those who don't. Have you ever wondered why some runners keep getting faster every year, while others seem to train just as hard but barely improve? Is it their long runs, their interval workouts, their running form, their genetics? There are plenty of factors that matter, but if I had to choose one thing that makes the biggest long term difference, it would be this: peaking. And I don't just mean tapering before a race. I'm talking about the entire process of preparing your body to perform at its absolute best on one specific day. Because when you learn how to peak properly, something very interesting happens. You can run a time that, just a few months earlier, seemed completely out of reach. You may even run faster than you ever thought you were capable of. And here's the really important part. Every time you go through a proper peak, you can move your starting point forward. In other words, peaking isn't just about running your fastest race day. It's about becoming a better runner for your next race, and the race after that, and the one after that. Let me give you a simple example. Imagine two runners, Mr. A and Mr. B. Both want to break 3 hours in the marathon. They race the same marathon in March and both run 3:10, exactly the same time. But runner A understands how to peak. Over the next 6 months, build a solid aerobic base, gradually increases training, and then transitions into more race-specific training before properly recovering for the next race. 6 months later, A runs 3:05. Then another 6 months pass. A goes through the same process again, and this time A breaks 3 hours. Now, let's look at runner B. B doesn't really understand peaking. He trains throughout the year, but the training structure stays more or less the same. 6 months later, B runs 3:08. Not bad. But 6 months after that, things start to go on in the opposite direction. B fails badly after 35 kilometers and finishes in 3:12. 1 year earlier, A and B had exactly the same marathon time, but 1 year later, A has broken 3 hours. B hasn't even improved on his original performance. This is a hypothetical example, but honestly, situations like this happen all the time, and the difference isn't always the one runner works harder than the other. Sometimes one runner knows how to build toward a race, and the other doesn't. So what exactly is peaking? What is peaking? Peaking is essentially the process of preparing your body to produce its best possible performance on a specific race day. That's it. You are building your fitness, developing the abilities you need for your race, and then gradually bringing everything together so that your performance reaches its highest point at exactly the right time. And if you want to perform at your absolute best in a marathon or another long distance race, I strongly believe peaking is something you should understand. Why? Because long distance running is very different from many other sports. You can't simply go out and produce your absolute best performance every few days, especially in the marathon. A marathon places an enormous amount of stress on your body. Your muscles take a beating. Your energy systems are heavily stressed. Your immune system and even your digestive system can be affected. And your performance can be dramatically influenced by your physical condition on race day. Think about something as simple as getting sick. Of course, being sick hurts performance in almost every sport. But in distance running, the effect can be enormous. I've experienced this myself. When I was high school, I was a sub 15 minutes 5K runner, but once I had a slight fever and ran a 10K race anyway. I finished in 35 minutes. That's around 330 per kilometer. For a runner who can break 15 minutes for 5K, 330 per kilometer should normally feel relatively comfortable in training. But one that day, that was my race pace. That's how much your physical condition can change your performance in distance running. And that's exactly why peaking matters. You don't need to be at your absolute best every single week. Instead, you want to build your fitness over a long period of time and then choose one race where you bring everything together. Because in the marathon, you don't need to prove your fitness 20 times. You only need to get it right once. One race, one day, one performance. And it everything comes together. That becomes your personal best. So the first major benefit of peaking is obvious. It allows you to perform at a level that may be higher than what you thought your current fitness could produce. But here's where things get really interesting, because that's actually not the most important benefit of peaking. There's another benefit that most runners completely overlook. And understanding this can completely change the way you think about your training. Because proper peaking doesn't just help you run faster on race day, it can raise your starting point for the next training cycle. And that's what we are going to talk about next. The hidden power of peaking. So let's go back to that question. What can peaking actually do for you? Most runners would probably say, it helps me run my fastest time on race day. And that's absolutely true. But there is a much more interesting side to peaking. To explain it, let me tell you a story. A few years ago, something remarkable happened at one of Japan's biggest running events, the Hakone Ekiden. If you are not familiar with it, the Hakone Ekiden is one of the most famous university relay races in Japan. It takes place every January. 20 university runners cover roughly 200 kilometers over 2 days, running from Tokyo to Hakone and back. And in Japan, this race is a massive event. For many Japanese runners, it's one of the biggest races of the entire year. Now, a few years ago, there was a very highly anticipated matchup. One of Japan's biggest youngsters was Keita Sato from Komazawa University. At the time, Sato was only 19 years old, but he was already an extraordinary runner. In high school, he had set Japanese high school records in the 1500 meters, 3000 meters, and 5000 meters. And by the time of this Hakone Ekiden, he had already run 27:28 for 10K. That's an incredible level. He was considered one of the strongest runners in Japan. But on the other side was a runner from Aoyama Gakuin University. The name is Aoi Ota. At the time, Ota's 10K personal best was around 28:20. So, on paper, Sato was clearly faster. We are talking about almost a 50-second difference over 10 kilometers. If you look at their personal best, you would probably expect Sato to win. But that's not what happened. When the race was over, Ota won. And he didn't just beat Sato. He ran 21 kilometers in 59:47, setting a course record and taking the stage win. Sato also ran incredibly fast. He finished in 1 hour and 13 seconds, also under the previous course record. So this wasn't a case of Sato having a terrible day. Both runners were performing at an extremely high level, but Ota somehow managed to beat a runner who was clearly faster than him on paper. So how did he do it? The answer: peaking. Ota had reportedly spent the entire year preparing specifically for the Hakone Ekiden. In other words, this wasn't just another race for him. This was the race. He structured his training about being at his absolute best when that race arrived. And when the big day came, he was ready. That's the power of peaking. You can take the same athlete with the same body, the same talent, the same training history, and put them in a slightly different stage on race day, and the result can be completely different. That's why picking is so powerful. But here's where I want you to think beyond just one race. Because, yes, the previous benefit of picking is you can perform at your absolute best when it matters most. But there's another benefit that is much more important for your long term development. And this is something I wish more runners understood. The benefit nobody talks about. Let's imagine that you spend the next 4 months preparing for a marathon. You start with easy running. You build your training volume. You develop your aerobic system. You gradually introduce more demanding steady running. Then, as the race gets closer, you begin doing more race specific workouts. Finally, you taper, and then you race. That's what a proper peak looks like. But here's the important part. Your body doesn't simply forget everything after the race. All the adaptations you built during those months are still there. Your aerobic capacity is better. Your muscles are stronger. Your running economy may be better. Your ability to handle training is better. Your race specific abilities are better. Even if your race result wasn't what you wanted, you may still be better runner than you were 4 months ago. And that's the hidden power of peaking. Think about it this way. Your first marathon cycle might start here. Then you train for several months. You peak, you race. And now, your new starting point is higher. Then you do it again. Build, peak, race, recover, build again, peak again. And every time you do it properly, you have the opportunity to start the next cycle from a higher level. That's why I don't think peaking should be viewed as simply, how do I get into shape for my next race? It should be viewed as, how do I use this race cycle to become a better runner for the next one? And this is where periodization becomes extremely important, because you can train everything maximally all year long. You can't spend 12 months doing hard intervals. You can't spend 12 months running at marathon pace. And you can't keep pushing your body harder and harder without changing the stimulus. Eventually, your body stops responding. Instead, you need different phases. You need a period where you build the foundation, a period where you develop more race specific abilities, and finally, a period where you reduce fatigue and allow your fitness to fully express itself. That's what creates a peak. And when you repeat that process over and over, something very interesting happens. You don't just get better at racing, you get better at building yourself into a better runner. And that is why, over 1 year, 2 years, or even 5 years, the difference between a runner who understands peaking and one who doesn't can become enormous. But there's still one question. How exactly should you structure a peak? What should you do 3 months before the race? What should you do 1 month before? And what should happen during those final 2 weeks? That's where the real framework begins. How to build the perfect peak. So, how do you actually build a peak? The basic idea is surprisingly simple. Start far away from race pace and gradually move toward it. Think of your training like a pyramid. At the bottom, you have your broadest foundation, and as the race gets closer, that pyramid becomes narrower and more specific. This is the basic idea behind periodization. Let me break it down. Phase 1. Build your foundation. When your race is still several months away, you don't need to spend most of your time training at race pace. In fact, you probably shouldn't. This is a time to build your foundation. And this is where the three types of running we've talked about on this channel come together. Easy running lets you train more. You use easy running to increase your training volume without consistently accumulating fatigue. Then you have steady running builds your engine. This is where you develop your aerobic capacity and make your body better at producing energy for long period of time. And eventually, hard running unlocks your speed. This is where you begin pushing closer to the upper limits of your aerobic system and developing the ability to sustain faster speed. But here's the important part. You don't want to throw all of these into the same training week at maximum intensity. Instead, the emphasis changes depending on where you are in the training cycle. Early in the cycle, the goal is to build a broad foundation. You want plenty of volume. You want to become more durable. You want to improve your aerobic system. You want to make your body capable of handling more training. In other words, you're building the engine before asking it to produce maximum power. And this phase can last several weeks. For some runners, it might be 6 weeks. For others, 8, 10, or even 12 weeks. It depends on the distance you are training for, your experience, your current fitness, and how much time you have before the race. But the principle stays the same. Build the foundation first. Phase 2. Get more specific. Then, as the race gets closer, something starts to change. Your training gradually becomes more specific to the race you are preparing for. Let's say you are training for a marathon. Early in the cycle, you might spend a lot of time depending general aerobic fitness. But as the race approaches, you begin incorporating more marathon-specific work. Long runs become more important. Marathon pace running becomes more important. You might include longer segments at or around your target pace, and the overall training starts to look more and more like the demands of the actual race. This is what I mean by specific training. You are essentially cheating your body. This is what I'm going to ask you to do on race day. And the closer you get to the race, the more specific the training should become. But here's something interesting. Early in the training cycle, it's very easy to distinguish between your speed training and your endurance training. You might have one workout that is clearly about speed, another workout that is clearly about endurance. But as you get closer to race day, those two things start to overlap. Your workouts become both fast and long. You're asking your body to produce a high level of speed, while also maintaining that speed for a long period of time. And that's exactly what you want. Because the closer you get to the race, the closer your training should resemble the demands of the race itself. Phase 3. Taper. And finally, you reach the last stage, the taper. This is where many runners get confused. Some people think tapering is peaking, but that's not quite right. Tapering is only one part of peaking. Peaking is the entire process of preparing for the race. Tapering is simply the final stage where you reduce training fatigue and allow your body to express the fitness you've built. Think about it like this. Imagine you've spent months building a powerful engine. You've improved your aerobics capacity. You've increased your durability. You've practiced race-specific skills. You've developed your speed. But if you keep driving that engine at full speed right up until the race day, you may arrive at the starting line exhausted. That's exactly what the taper is designed to prevent. You reduce your training load. You allow accumulated fatigue to disappear. But you don't simply stop running. You maintain enough intensity and frequency to keep your body feeling sharp. The goal is to arrive at the starting line with high fitness and low fatigue. That's when your performance can finally reach its peak. And this is why I want you to remember something. Peaking is not about doing more training. It's about putting the right training at the right time and then giving your body the opportunity to adapt. Why you shouldn't peak all year. Now, there's another important reason why this structure works. You might be thinking, if peaking makes me faster, why don't I just stay in peak sharp all year? It sounds logical, but your body doesn't work that way. You can't stay at your maximum race-specific fitness indefinitely. Eventually, fatigue accumulates. Your body stops responding to the same stimulus, and you run out of room to improve. That's why we need different phases. We build, we develop, we specialize, we recover, and then we race. After the race, we recover, and we start building again. And this is where the long-term advantage of peaking becomes really powerful, because every training cycle gives you another opportunity to build a stronger foundation. Then you take that stronger foundation into the next cycle, and then you build again. It's a continuous upward process. But what happens if you don't do this? You may end up doing basically the same type of training all year. The same workouts, the same intensity, the same weekly structure. And at the same point, your body simply says, I've already adapted to this. Your training becomes repetitive. Your progress slows down. And you start wondering, why am I training so hard but not getting any faster? This is one of the biggest reasons why runners plateau. It's not always because they need to train harder. Sometimes they need to train differently. And that's exactly what a well-designed peak allows you to do. You give your body different stimulus at the right time. You give your body a different stimulus at the right time. You allow it to adapt. Then you move on to the next stimulus. And over months and years, those adaptations begin to stack on top of each other. That's how you build a stronger runner. Not by trying to be at your best every single week, but by creating a process that allows you to become better year after year. And there's one final piece to this puzzle. What happens if you do everything right, build your fitness, peak properly, and then still have a bad race? Does that mean all the training was wasted? Absolutely not. And understanding why is one of the most important lessons you can take away from this video. What if you peak and still have a bad race? Now, there's one more thing I really want you to understand. What happens if you do everything right? You build your aerobic base, you gradually increase your training, you move into race-specific workouts, you taper properly, you arrive at race day feeling ready, and then you still have a bad race. Does that mean all your training was wasted? Absolutely not. And this is one of the biggest advantages of understanding peaking. Because peaking isn't only about getting the perfect result on one particular day. It's also about moving your starting line forward. Think about it this way. Let's say you've spent 3 or 4 months preparing for a marathon. During that time, you build your aerobics capacity. You improve your endurance. You increase your training volume. You develop your ability to handle race-specific intensity. And then, for whatever reason, race day doesn't go well. Maybe the weather is terrible. Maybe you get sick. Maybe simple don't have your best day. That doesn't erase the training you did. Your body still adapted. The fitness you built is still there. And sometimes the adaptation from the training back doesn't even show up immediately. You might do all the right training for November marathon and not see the full benefit in November. But that training might show up several months later. For example, you might build toward the next New York City Marathon in November, but the biggest performance breakthrough comes at the Boston Marathon the following April. The training wasn't wasted. You simply weren't ready to express all of it yet. And this is why I don't want you to judge an entire training cycle based only one race result. Instead, ask yourself, did I train consistently? Did I complete the right workouts? Did I recover properly? Did I gradually improve my fitness? If the answer is yes, then you have something extremely valuable. You have a higher starting point for your next training cycle, and this is where the difference between runners becomes enormous. One runner has a bad race and thinks, everything I did was wrong. So they throw away the entire training plan. They start looking for a completely different method. They suddenly increase their mileage. They add more hard workouts. They change everything. And before their body can adapt, they are exhausted again. Another runner has the same bad race, but they think, the result wasn't what I wanted, but I built something during this training cycle. So they keep the thing that worked. They identify what needs to improve, and then they start the next cycle from the higher level. Do that once, and the difference might be small. Do it for 2 years, and the difference can become enormous. That is the real power of peaking. So how do you actually peak? So how should you actually structure a peaking cycle? The basic idea is very simple. Start with the race and work backward. Far away from your goal race, your training should be relatively general. This is where you build the foundation. You develop your aerobic capacity. You increase your training volume. You improve your durability. And you work on both sides of the pyramid, speed and endurance. At this stage, you don't need to consistently train at race pace. In fact, you shouldn't. Your goal is to build the physical qualities that will eventually allow you to handle race-specific training. Then, as the race gets closer, your training gradually becomes more specific. Your workouts start to resemble the demands of your target race. The intensity becomes more race-specific. The duration becomes more race-specific. And eventually, your training starts to look a lot like the performance you are trying to produce on race day. Then comes the final stage, the taper. This is where you reduce fatigue while trying to maintain as much fitness as possible. And this is an important distinction. Tapering is not the same thinking as peaking. Tapering is only one part of the peaking process. Peaking is the entire process of taking your fitness and gradually turning it into your best possible performance on one specific day. That's why I like to think of peaking as a pyramid. At the bottom, you have a broad foundation. Then, as you get closer to race day, the training becomes narrower and more specific. And finally, you arrive at the top. You race. The cycle never really ends. And here's the most important part. Once the race is over, you don't go back to zero. You start the next cycle from the higher level. That's the whole point. Build your foundation, develop your fitness, become more specific, peak, race, recover, and then build again. If you repeat this process over and over again, every marathon becomes more than just another race. It becomes another opportunity to raise your baseline, another opportunity to learn, another opportunity to adapt, and another opportunity to become a better runner. That is why I believe peaking is one of the biggest difference between runners who continue to improve and runners who eventually get stuck. Because without the structured peaking process, training can easily because random. You train hard when you feel like training hard. You run long when you feel like running long. You taper when the race is getting close. And then you hope everything comes together on race day. Sometimes it does. But over the long term, that's a very difficult way to consistently improve. With peaking, you have a process, and that process gives your training a direction, the big picture. So if you remember only one thing from today's video, remember this. Don't just train to become fitter. Train to become your best on race day. Build your foundation, develop your aerobic system, increase your capacity. Then gradually make your training more specific. And finally, remove the fatigue that is hiding the fitness you built. That's peaking. And if you repeat that process year after year, you don't simply get better at one race. You raise your entire level as a runner. That's how you turn one training cycle into another, and another, and another, until one day you look back and realize you are a completely different runner from the person you were a few years ago. And that's exactly what I will want for you. So if you are serious about improving your marathon or long distance performance, don't just ask, what workout should I do? Start asking, where am I in my training cycle? Because the best workout isn't always the hardest workout. It's the workout that makes sense for where you are right now, and that's the real power of peaking. Alright, that is for today. Before you go, if you want to learn more about long distance training and how to get faster without injuries or overtraining, I also have a free newsletter for amateur learners. I go deeper into the topics I talk about here on YouTube, but in a format you can read the study at your own pace. And right now, when you subscribe, I also send you free copy of the 3 factors you should know to get faster dramatically without injuries and overtraining. It was written by professional runner and coach Ikegami Hideyuki, one of Japan's top marathon coaches and my mentor. If you'd like a copy, you'll find the link in the description below. Thanks again for watching, and remember, easy running lets you train more. Steady running builds your engine. Hard running unlocks your speed. And peaking turns everything you've built into your best performance on race day. If you found this video helpful, hit like button and subscribe to the channel. And I'll see you in the next video. Take care and happy running. Bye bye.